everybody, to another episode of Machtails from the Cantina, and happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. Now, you know that I do this for fun. I'm not a professional. I don't have the right equipment. By the end of the episode, I'm usually leaning into the screen. My volume is sometimes overblown because all I'm using is my computer mic. But make no mistake, my next guest is a true professional, one of the best in the business. He is a co-host of the best Star Wars podcast show out there. From the Buckeye State, would you please welcome my friend and yours, Mr. Jason Swank. Jason, thanks so much for spending time with me today.
Delighted to be with you, Chris. Thanks very much. And happy Father's Day.
Yeah, happy Father's Day, man. Wait, what are you drinking, by the way?
Well, this is just bourbon. This happens to be Jim Beam, which is generally not my bourbon of choice. It's sort of the everyday sipper. On a budget. It's a pandemic. It's lean times.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
But nothing against Jim Beam. I like Jim Beam, but it's,
Every time I think of you, I think of Frank Sinatra, and I think of the hard liquor. You're not a beer guy in my mind. So
no, it bloats me, and it makes me it's not that I don't enjoy the taste of it. I don't enjoy the way it reacts with my system. So I thought there was something wrong with me when the first time I ever had a drink was in high school. And in my family, that's late. But I had my first beer, and it just never agreed to me with me. And it wasn't until I got a little older and got introduced to whiskey and gin and vodka, and I found my drink of choice. So it's definitely whiskey and bourbon.
Oddly enough, I have bourbon in this glass.
Is that a Manhattan?
This is an old fashioned.
It's an old fashioned. Okay,
it's pretty much a fruit salad with bourbon in a glass. And
yeah, that's a good one.
This is Bullet bourbon. That's like.
I love Bullet bourbon. I love Bullet. Yeah, Bullet and Makers and Jack Daniels. Those are my favorites. You were talking about what a pro, and I feel bad. I'm not even in my studio. I'm on my back porch because I felt that if I was in my studio, that it would feel like I'm interviewing you, So yeah. I wanted to take myself out of that environment, and I could also have a cigar and have a drink or two and just chat.
You know what? I love you in that environment. You got the brick wall behind you. It feels like we've kind of all hit a brick wall during this crazy 2020 we're having. It's good to see you out of the studio because I know you spend a lot of time there.
A lot of time there, especially now. Working from home, I'm in, that the studio is also sort of my office throughout the day. So the days that Jim and I are recording something, I'm in there from about 9 in the morning, 8:30, 9 in the morning until midnight, 1 o'clock a.m.
I've known you, oddly enough, as long as I've known Jimmy, but me and Jimmy have gotten close because of the distance between me and him versus me and you. To me, you are the butterfly effect of Jimmy's Star Wars podcasting career. You were there before him, you've been there since day one. You started off with the Force Cast. I don't know this part about you, but can you kind of take me back to the beginning and just, did you plan on having it become what it is today when you first started off?
No, all I wanted to do when it started is this is going back to spring of 2006. So we were just about a year after the release of Revenge of the Sith. And Chris, I know you because we've talked about it. That was a difficult time for a lot of Star Wars fans because we thought it was over. I mean, we thought it was really, really over after that film.
Well, now that Celebration 3 is finally over, the big question is, now what do we do?
The genesis of this project really started right around the last time we were all gathered together under one roof, Celebration 3 and the release of Revenge of the Sith, and kind of a little bit of a depression that you had after that was over because you thought Star Wars was over.
Right after coming back from Tunisia and meeting George Lucas in London and going to these premieres across the world, it was just like, I was depressed, man.
Yeah, he was depressed. He was very depressed.
I had started listening to podcasts, tech podcasts, but I had never listened to a Star Wars podcast. I didn't even know there really was a Star Wars podcast. There was an online radio show. This is before podcasting, it was where you could do some sort of streaming, and I think it was France. It was called Star Wars on Direct. Star Wars on Direct. And that was the first time I was aware that there might actually be an audience for a talk show, because I grew up listening to talk radio, that there might be an audience for a talk show meets Star Wars. So the thought had crossed my mind once or twice, and the more I learned about podcasting, and I even bought a book, like the Dummies Guide to put, the Dummies books.
Yeah, the yellow
I bought one of those. Yeah, the yellow. Yeah, and that was before I ever even thought about doing a Star Wars podcast. Really, I just wanted to know more about it because I've loved radio, particularly talk radio. Talk radio hosts were like surrogate fathers, brothers to me growing up. And so that bond between the voice coming out of the radio and the listener has always been really, really big with me. From Howard Stern to Rush Limbaugh to local radio shows that I listen to in Northeast Ohio. And so that was always sort of in my blood. I even worked in promotions and radio professionally. Never was on air, not on purpose, setting up radio remotes and things like that. So, again, that was sort of just in my makeup. I wanted to sort of bring that spirit of talk radio to Star Wars discussion. Thought if sports fans can have sports radio, why can't Star Wars fans have Star Wars talk? And then in the spring of 2006, of course, who wasn't, as a Star Wars fan, looking at Force.net and Rebelscum.com? I mean, they were the gold standard of Star Wars websites back then. There was a post by Dustin Roberts on Rebel Scum saying they're looking for a host they wanted to reboot the TFN, that time Force.net podcast. I needed to do something to get his attention because I knew that there was going to be lots of people wanting to do this. And I knew there would be people with actual experience, and I didn't have any. I think in the email I said, and I'd be happy to send a demo. I remember that. I'd be happy to send a demo, because in radio, you send a demo tape. So within just a few hours, he emailed me back, and he said, yeah, sounds great. Send me your demo tape.
In a few hours. And you're like, oh my God, I don't have a demo tape.
Yeah, I don't have a demo. So a good buddy of mine worked right across the hallway from me. We were we were in Cubeville, and he was right across the hall, and we would just sit and talk Star Wars all day long. And so the thought of doing something like that by myself just terrified me. So I looked across the way and I said, hey, Pete, what are you doing tonight? He's like, nothing.
Pete was already a friend of yours.
Pete was a friend of mine. Yeah, we worked at an insurance company together. So I said, what are you doing tonight? Nothing. You want to record a Star Wars podcast? I mean, I just love him to death because he was just like, he didn't question it. He didn't say, what are you talking about? He just went, okay. So that's where it started. And we did this demo. It was just terrible.
As always, I'm your host, Jedi Swank, and with me,
as always, is Master Nadel.
And we're going to bring you all the news that's fit to muse.
For a Star Wars fan.
Does that work? Did that work? All the news that's fit to muse? I don't think that works.
No, that's probably pretty bad, actually.
Yeah, it's just terrible.
It got you the job, man.
It got us the job. It got us the job. They debated about it all summer. And then finally, in the end of August, they were like, yeah, we want to do this, and let's kick it off on Labor Day weekend. Let's do it. So the first episode of the Force Cast with Jason and Pete went out on Labor Day 2006.
Wow, and it was only like 5 months after that when I got the opportunity to meet you and Pete.
Well, that was it, Chris. There were little milestones along the way that kind of gave us the affirmation that we needed that what we were doing was resonating. But it was really when you reached out and you were working on The Force Among Us at that time. Celebration was coming up, and you asked us to moderate your panel. And that just blew us away. And it was truly, I mean, it was like, oh my God, I think we actually have a voice in this community.
My name's Jason. I'm with the Forcecast. All right. Thank you, guys. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce the creative team behind The Force Among Us. I think we have the second greatest brother-sister duo in Star Wars up here.
And so that ended up being the first time we were ever on any kind of celebration stage, and it ended up being the first time that I ever met Jimmy Mack in person. Was that convention.
You know what's funny? I felt the same way about you guys when you said you would moderate our panel. I was like, oh my God. You know, these guys are going to moderate our panel. I'm like, we're onto something here. So it was, and I think to this day, me and Jimmy talked about this too. That's the great thing about the relationship, and especially it's very, very rare, as you know, in fandom nowadays, especially social media and then the turns and the twist that it's taken. But me and you and Jimmy have had this give relationship. Yeah. And there's still a couple people from, like you said, those milestone moments, those days that, you know, we built a relationship with since. But it's amazing that we're here like 13 years later.
I know. It's really awesome. So, I mean, I just have such great memories of sitting late, having a few drinks with you and your sister Courtney, your cousin Glenn. And it was just such a great time. You know, those shows back at like C4, C5, C6. It's hard for fans that have just gone to maybe the last handful of conventions to realize how different it really was. I mean, and of course we can always say when you get older, oh, it was better back then. But in this case, it's hard to say that it wasn't better. It was less formal. It felt less corporate. The accessibility you had with the talent was just incredible. And the ability to form friendships over those celebrations and fan days in Dallas and things like that.
It built the positive side of the community that we appreciate and we can look fondly back on.
Chris, I know you're a huge fan and appreciator of Irvin Kershner. Jimmy and I were just talking, we were reminiscing, 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back, talking about how we sat there at the Irvin Kershner panel. I mean, I realized I was there, listening to Irvin Kershner. It was so compelling and fascinating. But looking back on it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was there, Irvin Kershner doing a panel. And it would be, he didn't live too much longer after that, or certainly wasn't making a lot of appearances. So we look back on that, like you say, with Robert Watson and these experiences that we had. And, as we get older, so do they. And we realize that we're not going to have these legends with us forever. So it becomes really special in hindsight.
It's kind of the equivalent of somebody going, I was at Woodstock. I was at the Fillmore. I saw Frank Sinatra live,
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
Really cool moments in time that just have passed and, they're no longer with us, unfortunately.
What prompted the Irvin Kershner discussion was there was an article that from a major publication, and their whole point was that, most Star Wars fans had no idea who Irvin Kershner was.
That's crazy.
And that just blew me away. And Jim was like, "No, that's everybody knows. Every Star Wars fan knows." And then it kind of dawned on us, like, maybe they don't. Maybe those that were introduced to Star Wars through Clone Wars and the sequel trilogy really don't. And they think George Lucas wrote and directed all those movies himself.
My half-brother, who was in the two documentaries, he was 5 years old when episode 1 came out. If I asked him if he knew who Irvin Kershner was, he'd probably say no, and he'd probably ask me,
Yeah.
Hey, who is this guy?
Right. And now, forget about Richard Marquand. Nobody knows that guy.
Right. Poor Richard, who passed away. I mean, he never even had the opportunity to go to a celebration.
No, I know.
Let alone do a panel. Do you and Pete still hang out?
Yeah, we see each other. Fairly often. I mean, Pete married my wife's best friend, so my wife and Pete's wife have been best friends since first grade.
That's crazy.
And and so we have kids that are about the same age, and they live about 10 minutes away from us. We text a lot. Pete's professional life really took off. He has an incredible job with a big company, and he has a ton of responsibility. And so we'd probably like to see each other more than we do, but we're still very close.
Did Jimmy take Pete's place? Like, was there a part where Pete was like, you know what, I can't do this anymore, and you were like, hey Jimmy, there's an opportunity? How did that evolve?
Jimmy was contributing regularly to the show. At first he started by contributing segments and bits, a lot that was recycled from incredible work he was doing covering Star Wars for CBS Radio in Chicago. We were terrified. We thought that this guy was going to just take over the show. That's what we thought. He was as you know, he's a big personality and has a ton of experience. And I really underestimated him. I thought that he would have wanted the on microphone glory, that who would just want to contribute in the background. And I didn't really understand what a great radio producer was and what they did. And that's what Jimmy was. Jimmy has worked with some of the best in the business, his wife being one of them. Guys like Jonathan Brandmeier. He worked with Siskel and Ebert on the radio. He's just worked with legends, and he was content and to be in the background. He never wanted to be on mic necessarily with us. But what he started to do was what we called polish the show. We would finish recording, we'd send it off to Jim, and he would add drops, and he would add various things that just tighten the screws. That's what he still says. Just tighten the screws a little bit, because he liked what we were doing. But he made it so much better. So when Pete decided that he just couldn't do it anymore, Pete was getting married, he was selling a house, and he was changing jobs all at the same time. Oh, wow. And I can't tell you how many times I have over the years I've texted Jimmy and say, dude, I'm so stressed out with the day job or with such and such. I can't record tonight. I just can't do it. I think Jim's done that to me maybe twice in these many years. I've done it, dozens of times. So I understand what it's like to have to, be on, and you've got and stuff going on in your life outside of the show is just in turmoil. So he made the decision to step away. Jim tried to convince me for a very short time to do the show solo. I didn't want to do it solo. So I think Jim came on full time. I feel like 2008, 2009.
Now, how many shows total between the Force cast, the Days of the Force cast, and Rebel Force Radio do you personally have under your belt, or did you lose count at this point?
Totally lost count. I mean, I would say a couple thousand.
Jeez. So what keeps you going? I mean, does Jimmy keep you going? Or?
Yes. He won't let me stop. No downtime.
No downtime when it comes to Star Wars, Chris.
When I started doing the show, I was working at an insurance company, and it's the least creative type job you can imagine. And for a creative person, you can relate to this, I know, creative person in a non-creative job will find a way to express themselves in some way. And I needed an outlet. And so that's what the Star Wars podcast was. And then my professional career really got back on track where I wanted it to be. And I have a job that I love going to, where I used to love going to. Now it's a little bit different. I don't go to it right now. I'm a marketing director for a performing arts center here in Cleveland. Second largest performing arts center in the country outside of Lincoln Center in New York. And primarily responsible for all the marketing and PR for the entertainment that comes through, especially the Broadway shows that come through. So touring Broadway. And that's, live theater has been, I started doing theater as a kid when I was 10 years old, and did community theater, was a theater major in college, and it's just always been involved in the theater community. So when the opportunity came to do that professionally, that was a huge deal. So here I was, forced to sort of be on and creative in the day job, and then, with the podcast. And so that's been a struggle here and there. I would say that the thing that keeps drawing me back is just is Star Wars and my love of Star Wars. If my tank is a little empty, all I have to do is put one of the films on, and it just takes me back. And it's a combination of the enthusiasm and the passion I have for the whole franchise, as well as the responsibility that I feel, because I feel like, well, I'm the one that has put myself out there. So I can't just stop, I mean, it's probably sounds maybe a little egocentric, and I don't mean it that way. But when you know that you have tens of thousands of listeners, that also keeps you going, because you want to do it for them as well. Sure.
I can relate. A lot of the stuff that I do, Star Wars related, I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily egocentric, but I usually try to tie in my personal story. Whatever happened in Star Wars this year, I'm probably not going to be necessarily talking about it, but I'm going to find some crazy way, like, hey, let's shoot a reality show about us at the drive-in. Like, hey, it's got to be about us. It's that firstborn syndrome, I guess.
I mean, I think all great art and creativity, it has to come from a personal place.
I get sidetracked, as you mentioned, with the family, with the real life job, with all this stuff. Ian doesn't keep me going. I keep Ian going. And Ian, like, I get mad sometimes at his ways of being uncreative. I'm like, dude, do I have to create everything? I have a marketing company here in Chicago where my client is somebody that deals with primarily theater. I'm the guy that puts posters in the window and flyers on the counter. And I'm sure you guys have printed material as well.
We do.
Man, we got hit hard, as you know, this year. I mean,
because it's gone. It's really, really hard to sort of come to terms with. I always feel guilty about complaining, because I know that for every one of me, there's thousands, if not, in this case, I think millions of people that have it far worse. There's 20-some million people unemployed right now, and I'm still employed. But you can't always just go through life comparing yourself to those who have it worse than you, or you would never improve.
Sure.
So I acknowledge that, but to have what you have worked for, and I've worked in this particular capacity for going on 8 years, and going from having 21,000 season ticket holders for the Broadway series, and in 7-8 years getting that to just under 50,000 season ticket holders, the largest base of season ticket holders for any Broadway touring Broadway series in the country, in fact, probably North America, actually. But to have that just killed overnight, basically, it's really hard. It's really hard. It'll come back. We'll come back. I know. We'll rebuild, just like people do, and people have, humans have done this for generations and generations and generations. You get a big natural disaster, you rebuild, but it still sucks. It still sucks. So yeah, it's hard. It's very hard to watch that happen. And the podcast has been a really, really great diversion from just too much reality,
Sure. Yeah, well, it's an escape, That's the thing about this show here is, we don't provide 101% escape, obviously, because I like to talk to people, friends that have been affected by this, and how are you dealing with it, and these sort of things. I mean, what would you say has been the most stressful part of 2020?
Just the unknown. The fact that we're still sitting here 3 months, over 3 months into this. Businesses are starting to reopen in Ohio. Ohio is probably one of the more aggressive in terms of lockdown early. Things are starting to reopen. The zoo that my wife works at is going to reopen next week under limited capacity. But I work in a business, Chris, that is, and the reason that your theater clients are likely to not come back online still for a few more months is because that business is not designed, not built to play to 300 people, 400 people. You know,
Right.
until audiences can be shoulder to shoulder in a theater, in a crowded theater, it's not going to come back. So whether that's masks or whether that's a vaccine or a combination of both or therapeutics, whatever it is, it's going to have to be something, because the business is not scalable down the way others are. At least, you know, live theater. You know, Hamilton said, for example, they're not reopening on Broadway until they can play at full capacity, because they can't make the numbers work.
I do a lot of marketing still in the music business, and it's like you can't have, well, one, you can't deal with general admission, right? Because that's not going to work, because people are going to be shoulder to shoulder. And it's still too early right now at this point to just, you know, have people run out and overpopulate stadiums and music halls and theater, theater rooms. And, you know, then what do you do? Because the performers and the production has a certain amount they need to make. And if you're doing half full, you know, what are you going to do? Triple the ticket price? You can't do that.
Right. You can't do that. Yeah, you can't do that, because then you're not providing a service for as broad a spectrum in the community as you can. I mean, now Broadway theater has a reputation because of big blockbuster shows of, you know, perhaps being for the wealthy or, you know, people with means. But I can tell you in Cleveland, you know, Cleveland is a very industrial town. It's a very blue collar city. These are not the hoi polloi exclusively coming to these shows. These are blue collar, regular folks that just have a love of live theater and are supporting live theater and Broadway and want to experience it. So it's affecting everyday people. And so, you know, like you say, you can't say, all right, well, these tickets that used to be $50 are now $300 because we can only sell, you know, a third of the house. It's not going to work. And it's not part of the nonprofit mission of a performing arts center either to do it that way.
You said Jimmy Mack has this larger than life personality. Does he ever steal the spotlight from you?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that question. You know, it's like a dance. You know, there are times when he's leading and there are times when I'm leading. Every once in a while, and you'll hear it on the show, to complete the analogy, you might see a little of this or hear a little of that. I think we complement each other very, very well in the sense that I think I offer something that he doesn't have, and certainly vice versa. Just like a great ensemble, you know, it's like, did Abbott, you know, steal the spotlight from Costello? We're a duo, and when he's really on, I know to get out of the way, and I think he knows the same. There's a great, deep relationship there. He's like a big brother to me. He really is. I mean, he isn't like a big brother. He is a big brother to me. I'm definitely more, you know, personally, I'm just much more private. I think I'm a little bit more of an introvert than Jimmy is. Jim loves, you know, going out and having a great time and whooping it up. Jim's the guy that's going to be dancing on the tables, and I'm going to be the guy kind of in the corner having a one-on-one conversation with somebody.
All right, so now I'm going to the Shoots. Fresh Haze IPA. This is like their New England IPA. And you know what? I'm trying to think where the Shoots is out of, but I got them at Binny's down the street from my house. So what I wanted to ask you, speaking about roundtables and interviews and guests on the show and you interviewing everybody, who was your worst?
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's a really good question. Because I've never thought about that before. There are times that Jimmy will book a guest. You know, I'll be sitting at dinner before we're going to record the show, and I'll look over and I'll say to my wife, I'll just be like, oh, he booked this guest, and I don't know anything about this person, and I don't know what to say, and I'm gonna be bored, and if I'm bored, people are gonna realize I'm bored, and it's one of those things. Why don't I learn? Every time I have the littlest bit of doubt, I always get proven wrong, and it ends up being a great interview. And when we wrap up the interview, I'm like, dang, Jim, that was great. Where did you find that person, or what gave you the idea?
What's with the anger and the animosity, not only towards you guys, and also towards Star Wars, the direction of Star Wars, where it went, where it came from. I don't understand it. It's like I feel like how come we can't all get along?
Clearly, there's been massive cultural shifts in the United States since the 2016 election. I think that was a huge turning point for a lot of people on both sides or multiple sides, however many sides there might be. Every side. It used to just be enough that you were a Star Wars fan and I was a Star Wars fan. We could go to conventions and we could talk about each other's families, and politics never entered it. I never thought about asking anybody at a Star Wars convention what their politics were. I was never concerned with anybody, at a Star Wars convention what their politics might be. I didn't care. I still don't. And I didn't think or care that anybody would want to know about mine or care about mine. I'm
more interested about the music you listen to and if you like baseball. I don't care about your politics.
Thank you. But you can't have a discussion about what happened to Star Wars and Star Wars fandom, unfortunately, without politics entering in, because it's not just Star Wars. I've known people who, families that have split up or splintered or fractured because of politics anymore. It's insanity to me. It's absolute insanity. Star Wars is about massive questions about, is there a God? Is there a force that binds the galaxy together? What is friendship about? What is family about? The nature of father and son, that relationship that is so heavily explored. These are questions that transcend politics.
Now you're a dad. You have 2 kids, correct?
I do. I have a 7-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl.
What is one word that you would use to describe being a dad?
Fulfillment.
To me, being a dad is very nostalgic. As you know, I lost my dad when I was 7. So I always feel like I'm making up for missed time.
I feel the same way. My dad was taken out of my life, not through death, but just through him making really, really bad choices. So I did not grow up with the father. And so, having children for me was about experiencing what I never did, what I never had. And there's been, I know that it doesn't always go well for some people. So if you have a rough childhood, or if you grew up without a father, sometimes, unfortunately, guys will be crappy dads. And then they'll blame it on the fact that they didn't have a good father or a father at all. Whereas I looked at it differently. I said, well, I'm going to try to be the type of dad that I always wished that I had growing up. And that's what fueled me.
I can relate to that. It's like I have really good memories of my dad. I mean, as many as I can have, because he passed away when I was 7. I blame maybe more of a bad upbringing on my mom, because my mom dated some real deadbeats after my dad passed away. So
we should trade stories. I got a long list of those guys.
Father's Day to me didn't really mean anything for like 32 years. When I became a dad, it was like, oh my God, this is fulfillment, nostalgic, special. Sometimes I feel like I spoil my daughter too much because I want her to give her more than I had. I'm sure you can relate.
Oh God, yes. That's a constant discussion in our houses. Are we spoiling the kids? And what I hope is that my kids learn that things are just things, and that it's more about their character and how they interact with us and with their friends and each other, as siblings, that's really what matters. So I think you can have a lot of things and still not think that things are the most important.
Yes, my daughter, I have not forced her to like Star Wars. I've not forced her into Star Wars fandom at such a young age. But it's kind of weird because I was her age when I first saw Empire Strikes Back. So I'm like,
Right.
hey, I was that age when I got the Dagobah playset, you know? It's weird, things like that. She knows all about the characters because, you know, I think she absorbed it when my wife was pregnant.
Mhm.
And but she always says, Daddy, Star Wars is your thing, you know? She's like, Frozen 2, that's my thing.
You know, that's interesting because it's like, is it really about Star Wars or is it about the passion that has fueled you throughout your life? And maybe it's going to be Disney for her, or Disney princesses, or whatever it might be. But if she learns what it's like to really have passion for something that gets her through all the craziness that's probably going to happen in her life, like it happens in all our lives.
Well,
I
especially
guess
right
that's
now.
really the message.
I mean, right now, craziness is happening to everybody this year, you know?
Yeah.
What is the coolest Father's Day gift you ever received?
Just Father's Day.
Yeah.
I never had a Father's Day until I became a father. So the gift is just Father's Day.
The thing about Father's Day is there's this feeling. It's like my birthday, you know, May 25th, Star Wars Day.
The real Star Wars Day, right?
Real Star Wars Day. Christmas, you know, like Father's Day it's a feeling. I feel like it's easy to be a dad and it's hard to be a mom at some point, you know? And
Yes. It really is. We do have an advantage because I look at my daughter and she's going to make that transition from, oh, dad to, oh, dad. Like I'm going to be sort of the lovable, embarrassing dad. Moms don't get that luxury. Like, you can go through a period where you're really resentful kind of your mom because, the way moms tend to, run the house and run some of the busyness of the house.
And they lay down the line and they have the structure.
Yes. Right. I don't know where this myth was that, wait till your father comes home. That's they can't wait till I come home.
I can't wait till Dad comes home because I'm going to get away with everything.
Exactly.
The thing that I like about Father's Day is just spending the time. Usually we take road trips, and obviously that's not happening, this year. My daughter's been at Grandma's house every other weekend. Grandma's the only one we've really seen during this pandemic time, which is sad. But it's cool that we get to see her. And I told my wife, I said, you know what? All I want to do for Father's Day is make sure that Danny's at home because I want to spend time with her. For Mother's Day, Michelle's like, you know what? She's going to Grandma's house. I need the back rub from you.
Yeah.
I need quiet time. How are you with your kids in Star Wars?
We've gone through phases. I got to be honest with you. When
That's
Force
what the
Awakens,
show's about. The show is about.
Well, I know, but I don't want you to get like angry emails, or I don't want people coming with pitchforks and torches after you. My biggest disappointment as a Star Wars dad is that, and I've heard this from more than one other parents out there. Force Awakens came out in 2015, and man, my little girl was all about Rey. She still has like a big, decal of Rey, life-size decal in her bedroom. And
she was how old when it came out?
She would have been 7.
Okay.
So that was 4 years ago. Yeah, it's perfect age. Perfect age. We watched all the films leading up to the release of Force Awakens, so she would have a good idea. And, my son was 3, but he was definitely paying attention for whatever reason. The sequel trilogy didn't stick with her. But they love the fact that I love it, and they love that I'm a dad that likes to watch cartoons. And I was just unboxing a box of new action figures that I got in the mail yesterday, and they're always interested. Well, who'd you get, Dad? Who'd you get? And what do you know? And so I think they just like the fact that that's kept me, maybe kept me young, kept me thinking maybe a little bit more like they think, more relatable, I guess.
The one thing that my daughter has learned from my Star Wars obsession is with her toys. She goes, I want to be like Daddy. I want to have one to keep in the box and one to open.
Oh, man, is that dangerous?
I know.
That's a lot of frozen figures you're going to have.
Yeah, it's too many.
A lot of Olafs.
If it wasn't for my father doing the act of taking his own life and dragging me through that experience growing up without a dad, I would not be... I probably wouldn't really care too much about Star Wars. How did everybody get back into Star Wars? Because everybody got out of it for a short time, if you're our age, you know. I mean, Jimmy's even admitted, yeah, I got out of Star Wars because I was interested in girls and that sort of thing.
Right. Girls and rock and roll and long hair. And
you know, my brother-in-law, he's, you know, Michelle's brother, he's my age. He likes Star Wars, but he's not into it like me. I don't get political with people like we were talking about earlier, but I'm like, what's that one thing that got you back into Star Wars, that just reeled you back in? Because not everybody our age is nuts about it like me and you.
I never left it. My older cousins that introduced me to Star Wars and my older brother, they did. There was something about that story. I went from, you know, Star Wars to the Goonies to Stand By Me to 89 Batman, into Star Trek The Next Generation, which was kind of Star Wars-y for me a little bit, and then learning about the original series and all of that. So it led me through an experience of media and storytelling and all of that, but I always circled back to what started it all for me, which is Star Wars. I think the special editions was the moment when I sort of redeclared myself a fanatic.
How old were you when the first Star Wars movie came out?
I was just born. I was born, I wasn't even born. I was born in August of 1977. My first memory of Star Wars is holding a Kenner 3 3/4 inch Stormtrooper action figure and wondering what this was. I feel like it was my first toy, but it was my brother's toy. The first Star Wars movie I ever saw was Return of the Jedi in the theater. You talk about seeing a movie changing your life. Nothing will ever compare to that feeling I had as a kid seeing Return of the Jedi. Even though it was the third chapter, it didn't matter. It blew me away. And it's still, I always call it my sentimental favorite because intuitively, I know that Empire is the superior film, but emotionally, I'm very attached to Jedi. I think it's really hard to top that final confrontation between Luke and Vader and the Emperor.
Yeah, that music, man. There's time to just put that music on alone, you know, and just with the voices in the back, and he comes out, and yeah, you know, as much as I like Empire slightly more than Return of the Jedi, yeah, they're very, very two comparable films, and I just don't understand the people that go, oh, what, the first Star Wars is my favorite. It's only because you saw it first. Who do you think is a better father, Han Solo or Galen Erso?
Han Solo.
See, I think Galen, man.
I know you love Rogue One, and I'm with you on that. I think Rogue One is by a mile the best Star Wars film since the prequels. I mean, in the Disney era, it is great. Rogue One is just phenomenal.
Everybody's got their claws. It's the best Disney era film. No, it's the best Star Wars movie.
Oh, wow. Okay, you're going to go that far. And if I would have been Galen, I mean, it was clever what he did. There's no question. It was clever what he did. I probably would have taken myself out. When I watched that confrontation between Han and Kylo in Force Awakens, I look at Han as sacrificing himself. Han knew potentially that the only way to rid Kylo of the pain that he was going through was for him to allow him to kill his father. He had enough faith that act would eventually be the seed of his redemption. For me, that was cemented in my own headcanon in Rise of Skywalker, and one I think just the incredible scene where they get that do-over. You know, he gets that mulligan. He gets to relive that moment and not kill his father. That is just super profound to me. The forgiveness on both of their parts is just it's tremendous. I love that. I love that whole subplot.
It's so profound when he says, "You're just a memory." And he's like, yeah, but your memory. There's so many memories that I have of my dad, and fortunate to have photos and video, and raising my daughter. It's like, what if I died tomorrow? She's still going to have a memory of me now. That statement, your memory, is so profound. Your memory,
right.
Everybody can relate to that.
Yeah, it is. And what we're willing to do for our children, right?
Yeah.
Willing to lay down our lives. And the fact that even his own memory of his father forgives him. If it's really his memory of Han, it would be easy for him to have a cynical memory that Han Solo would never have forgiven his son for that. Unconditional love. That's the thing. You know, I remember hearing about that before I became a parent. You know, you love your kids unconditionally. What, you mean they could murder somebody and you would still love them? Well, you would, of course, hate the act. You would hate that they did what they did, but you're always going to love your child.
You would still love them.
And that's the kind of love that I think you generally only have for a child.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, do you feel like you can relate to the Luke Vader story because of your dad removing himself from your life at such a young age?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, and I probably didn't know it consciously, but I think I was really motivated subconsciously by the story of this guy who kind of knew he was meant for bigger and better things, looking off at the twin sons. You know, I came from a very, and proudly come from a very blue collar family. There's a lot of construction workers in my family. There's a lot of laborers in my family. And I knew that was not a life for me. Kind of relating to Luke, that he knew that there was a better life out there for him, definitely drove me. And then that whole idea of confronting, maybe not your father physically, but maybe confronting the memory or the legacy of your father, one way or the other, coming to terms with it, forgiving what they did. I definitely think that was having an impact on me. I never really grew up with a resentment of my father, and maybe it was learning Luke's lesson. If anybody had reason to resent their father, it was Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
You know? But he didn't. And he forgave him in the end and knew that there was more good in him than evil. But I think that definitely was at play in my consciousness as a kid growing up, and probably led me to not have the same kind of bitterness that a lot of people have against maybe a parent that could have done things better.
So, you know, on Machtails, not only do we have cocktails and we drink and get to learn about each other, but we also have a little bit of a therapy session here.
That's right. That's right. Star Wars therapy.
I remember when I first saw the sunset scene for the next round, in 1992 it was. I was like, that's me looking out in the sun, like thinking about my dad, thinking about the past that's gone. That scene might mean something different to everybody, and I think that's why that scene might just be as profound and powerful as it is.
The one that does it for me, and I get goosebumps actually when I think about it, because it's been so profound for me throughout my life, is in Empire Strikes Back, and Luke's about to go into the cave, and he says, "What's in there?" And Yoda says, "Only what you take with you." And man, oh man, that is so true about any situation. You can be going into a meeting, and if you walk into a meeting and you think, "Oh God, this is just going to be another boring meeting and waste of my time," Well, if you take that in there with you, that's exactly what you're going to find.
Yeah.
But if you go in there, hey, what new cool thing might I discover? It's hard to do. I'm not perfect. I don't always do it. But what cool thing might I discover in here? And so I've always loved that. And I think that can be applicable to a lot of things in life.
And
it's only what you take with you.
Everybody can relate to that. All right, rapid fire.
Yeah.
Dean or Frank?
Frank.
3 other albums that you have with you, like let's say you're stranded in an apocalypse.
Queen Rock Montreal, Frank Sinatra and the Wee Small Hours, Billy Joel Greatest Hits Volumes 1 and 2.
Okay, shaken or stirred?
Stirred.
Who is the one person that you want to stay 6 feet away from, even when this is all over?
I had a boss at the radio station that I worked at, and he was the most awful human being I've ever met in my entire life. I hope he's better now. I hope he sought therapy, but there's a guy that I would never want to see again. I would go out of my way to not see.
Jazz or classical?
Jazz.
The least favorite Rat Pack member?
Peter Lawford.
What's the one thing that's on the Star Wars bucket list?
Talk to George Lucas.
The one thing you learned about your wife during the pandemic?
We have remarkably different parenting styles.
And you just learned that?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it was as obvious to me before the pandemic. Really, truly.
If not Jimmy Mac, who?
Billy Mac.
What would your book be called if it was just about the year 2020?
WTF.
I did blank in quarantine when I should have been doing this.
Worrying instead of learning.
I can relate to that. Has Star Wars made you cry? I know you've given Jimmy a hard time.
I have. Has Star Wars ever made me cry? No. Star Wars has never made me cry. It's only brought me joy.
This is a segment I like to pay tribute to Rogue One. Your father would be proud. Your father would be proud of you because
I became the father that he never could.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, Star Wars quote for a typical day in your household with your kids. I am your father. Don't make me destroy you. I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Don't make me destroy you. Totally. Don't make me destroy you.
Now, we've talked a lot about you and Jimmy being a duo. This is a non-Star Wars comparison duo. These are musicians only. Would you say you and Jimmy are more like Dean and Frank, Gene and Paul from Kiss, or Lars and James from Metallica?
I think there's a lot of parallels between Jimmy and me and Dean and Frank.
Do you have a Star Wars prized possession in your collection?
I do. I just happen to have it here. This is my original. Now, I do have some repro weapons here, but this is my original Jedi Luke action figure from Return of the Jedi. This was this typifies my childhood because this is a figure that I slept with in bed. It was under my pillow probably every night. I probably between the summer of '83 and sometime in 1985, I would say. He was my absolute favorite. He was my hero, my idol, and my favorite Luke moment is him walking into Jabba's palace, totally badass, and choking out those 2 Gamorrean guards. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, this guy is my life.
You know, I've heard you do some impersonations. I've heard you impersonate Jimmy Mac. I've heard you impersonate the trailer guy. Now, I confessed to Jimmy that I love what you guys do, but because I'm a music junkie and a baseball freak, it takes up some of my listening time. So I don't listen to you guys as much as I'd want to.
That's okay.
I have heard stories about you impersonating me on your show. So what I've done is I've queued up a clip, and if you're familiar with Japanese movies with English dubbed in,
Yes.
or you get the point.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
I'm going to share this with you, this screen with you. What you're going to do is you're just going to do the talking for me here.
Well, this is really good water. Might have to do a documentary about this water. Real fans of Dasani. Gonna do it.
All right, you get the idea.
I get it.
Okay.
I was
Cool,
doing
man.
your inner monologue. That was your inner monologue. You have probably the most distinctive voice of anybody that we have on the show on a regular basis. I mean, you would just. I know our listeners would. They're might be scrubbing through the show and they hear you and they know exactly who it is because there's no one else that sounds like you. I gotta know what gave you that voice.
The only thing that I can tie it back to is in the early 90s, I used to sing death metal.
Oh.
Man, my voice was so raw. I used to have to gargle with salt water all the time because it became so inflamed.
Yep.
And it never went away. And I went to the doctor and he said that I had like
Nodes?
Yeah, nodes and a deviated septum, and I have allergies, so I have some drip. So it's probably a combination of it. But I will tell you the greatest thing about my voice, I've been complimented a lot by the ladies. The ladies tend to love this voice.
It's a super sexy voice. You know why? Because it's not a low gravelly voice. It's a high mid-range voice with some gravel. So you're able to get all kinds of expression out of it. And at the same time, it's very masculine. It's very rare. You know, you were talking about Sinatra earlier, and I read something where they're like, what was the combination of cigarettes and whiskey that made that voice? Because he started out singing, he was a boy singer with big bands. He had a very pure kind of baritone. And then it just morphed into this quintessential American male voice that just defined kind of manhood for a generation and what a voice of an American man sounds like. And they were deconstructing it. It's like they got it down to the whiskey and the cigarettes. It probably what it was. But so I've always been I love voices. And I have always probably listened more to the style of a voice than I have the words that people have said. It makes a bigger impression on me sometimes. And no, your voice has always been fascinating. I got to see Harvey Fierstein speak. I got to see him in person. But great playwright and funny actor. I saw him in person, and when I saw him on the stage, I thought for a second, like, is he going to sound like that? Like, that's got to be a put on. That's not his voice. He doesn't possibly sound like that. And he got on that microphone and it came out and it was just like, oh my God, how does a human being create that sound? So the closest thing I can think of to Harvey Fierstein is Chris Macht.
Well, La Cage I wrote, and I didn't write it for myself, and I wrote it as a sort of child, so I never saw myself do it.
I told Jimmy years and years and years ago that you have the doppelganger voice of Steve Berthume. So I want you guys to take a look at this clip and let me know what you think, and you can decide.
Since I spent an entire summer after I graduated college, I had the kitchen table at the house stacked up floor to ceiling with old 3/4-inch tapes, and I just sent them out to all four corners of the globe, hoping to get a job in television somewhere.
That actually kind of sounds like your story.
A little bit. It absolutely does.
Jason, thank you for your time. I know you got a busy schedule, and we will see you guys next time on Machtails from the Cantina. Happy
Cheers.
Father's Day, everybody. Cheers.
You can take Star Wars with you. It goes wherever you go.